Hi, so this is a time lapse that'll have an explanation on my process. If you don't want to listen to me, there's another identical video with just music in the background. So I start out with the drawing committed to canvas in pencil. I apply a Payne's Gray wash to the entire canvas so I can still see my pencil marks. Then I start darkening specific areas of the painting that'll be in the shadows. Once I have a light gray tonal wash over everything, I begin putting colors on top of their designated areas, basically blocking in colors. I start with the darker tones and begin building up the highlights. Although you'll see me break my own rules from time to time, I generally start with the areas that are the furthest pushed back in the painting. The reason for this is I can layer new areas on top of old areas so there's no missing spots in the canvas. This is a big pet peeve of mine. I think it looks very amateurish if there's little areas of unpainted canvas showing through on the finished work. By layering these areas, I can overpaint each section just a little bit so that the new section in front will create a clean transition between the areas. The areas that you can see uncolored at this point will be the foremost sections, and I don't want to mess with them until the majority of the back sections are completed or near completion. I paint in very thin controlled layers. I don't build up a lot of paint, I really just put washes on over and over and over again. So the finished product actually has almost no peaks and valleys if you look at it from the side. I don't know if this is better or worse, it's just how I do it. I'm working with a pretty limited palette at this point. I have Payne's Gray, white, phthalo blue, purple, raw umber, raw sienna, and some magenta out. I haven't pulled any true carbon black out yet. In fact, I used very little in the whole painting. Most of my shadows will be done with the Payne's and the raw umber. Shadows are generally blue or warm in color depending on your light source. You don't really want to use black to create shadowed areas. I block in most of the colors with a 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch filbert brush. This helps me make the smooth blends in the larger areas. As I add details, most of my brushes are 1/8 inch or smaller filberts or small detail liner brushes. Most of these brushes are between 5 and 10 years old and get pretty beaten up, especially because most of my blending is done in more of a dry brush technique. The flesh tones are mostly done in raw sienna and white. Occasionally I'll mix in some magenta or red to redden up areas like the nose and the eyes. I'll mix in some raw umber or the Payne's Gray with the raw sienna to help darken the shadowed areas. Again, almost never using black for any shadows. Especially with the skin tones, this is just going to muddy up the color. Again, I cheat a little bit, but most important for me and my method is to paint the background first and then move forward. You can see I haven't even messed with her left boot or her gun yet. This painting was completed in one day. I started at about 10 in the morning, took a break around 2 o'clock or so, and then picked it up again around 4 or 5 o'clock, and finished up around 11 o'clock. I do jump back and forth into the background to do some details, but these are in areas where I know I won't have a collision with the foreground elements. Now that most of the background elements are completed, I move on to the gun and her left boot. For some of the really fine areas and the tattoos, I use a micron pen. This creates a harder black outline on the small details. I am capable of doing this with a brush, but the effect is tighter when I use a pen. I go back and smash a bunch of white highlights to the whole piece. This helps pull any element forward that I really want to highlight. Create a general wash of color for the tattoos. I want them to look lived in, not super bright. I then mask off and pin line the border. I intentionally leave the edge of the painting overpainted and distressed. This will be visible even when it's framed. Here's the original illustration and the finished piece. Comment below if you have any questions about my process.